Hello, I'm Chris Rogers. This is BBC World News. Our top stories. More than 1.5 million Americans take to the streets in protest against the new US President, Donald Trump. A train crash in eastern India kills at least 36 people. Many more are injured.
Hi, I'm Nick Marshall-McCormack. Join me for Sport Today in 15 minutes' time, where Andy Murray follows Djokovic out of the Aussie Open and Angelique Kerber is beaten as well. There's a day of upsets down under.
Hello and welcome. On his first full day in office, the new President of the United States, Donald Trump, saw at least 1.5 million people take to the streets in US cities to demonstrate against him. Some protests continued late into the night, such as this one we're showing you now in San Francisco. Well, there were other demonstrations around the world too. But Mr. Trump and his team have focused instead on the media's coverage of his inauguration on Friday. Despite live footage that showed smaller crowds than in previous years, the White House said there'd been record numbers at the ceremony. David Willis has more from Washington.
Donald Trump has got to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho.
In the nation's capital, they've rarely seen a rally quite like this. Not since the Vietnam War have so many people come together in defense of women's rights and minority rights, liberties these people believe could be imperiled by the presidency of Donald Trump. The man himself was visiting the headquarters of the CIA whilst that rally was underway. Less concerned about secrets, it appeared, than crowd sizes, in particular reports of the attendance at his inauguration the previous day.
I made a speech. I looked out. The field was, it looked like 1.5 million people. They showed a field where there were practically nobody standing there.
Good evening.
That theme was echoed in an unscheduled news conference a short while later. The new White House press spokesman railed against reports that Mr. Trump had failed to attract as large a crowd to his inauguration as Barack Obama.
This was the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period. These attempts to lessen the enthusiasm of the inauguration are shameful and wrong.
Official estimates of crowd sizes are not released, but aerial photographs appear to contradict the Trump administration's assessment. Nonetheless, Mr. Spicer, in his first briefing at the White House, went on to issue a thinly veiled threat to reporters covering the Trump presidency.
We're going to hold the press accountable as well. He will take his message directly to the American people, where his focus will always be.
Size clearly matters greatly to Donald Trump, and regardless of the inauguration crowds, the crowd at yesterday's protest was so large that a march on the White House proved impossible because there were so many people present. It's a question of which will ultimately prove the most unpalatable to the new administration, the messenger or the message. David Willis, BBC News, Washington.
Well, let's speak now to our correspondent Jane O'Brien, who joins us from Washington. Jane, the first 100 days of any presidency is very important. We already know that Donald Trump has been looking into Obamacare. Are we going to see him getting down to business?
Well, I think we already have. On day one, he issued executive orders that had a direct impact on housing insurance and people's ability to gain mortgages, pay for mortgages. We saw him signing an executive order that helped pave the way for the repeal of Obamacare, giving states more control over it. So I think we're already seeing him get down to business, but also there is this monumental distraction at the moment over who got the biggest crowd, whether it was President Trump on his inauguration, whether it was President Obama in 2009, or indeed yesterday's extraordinary march of women and other allied causes through Washington and 670 other cities across the world. So that seems to be his focus at the moment, rather than actually running the country.
And do you think, from your own assessment, that is because this could be something that continues, or is it just because of his inauguration? Do you think we're going to see more peaceful times on the streets of America?
Well, there was no violence yesterday. I mean, to put that into context, yesterday's march in Washington was very, very peaceful. I think the issue here is one of legitimacy. Donald Trump, we know, is very concerned of this perception, partly because of the allegations of Russian interference in the election, that somehow people don't think he is a legitimate president. And I think that's the lens we should be viewing his comments about the size of his support, the size of the opposition. And I think that in terms of protests and activism, no, I don't think yesterday was the last day at all. But I think the bigger question for those protesters is, where does this movement go from here? Where does the energy that we saw on the streets across the country get channeled? Is it going to result in any real leaders emerging that can take on a Donald Trump presidency? Will it help the Democrats sort out their party and put forward a hopeful for 2020? I think those are the questions facing the protesters. And for Donald Trump, it's a question of, can he knuckle down, ignore these distractions and believe himself that his presidency is legitimate?
Jane, interesting times. Jane O'Brien there in Washington. Many thanks. Well, Pope Francis has warned against a rise in populism. He said seeking a political saviour in times of crisis could lead to the election of leaders like Hitler. In an interview with a Spanish newspaper, the Pope also said it was too early to give an opinion on the US President Donald Trump. He suggested waiting to see what Mr. Trump did before passing judgment. But he condemned the use of walls and barbed wire to keep foreigners out. Let's have a look at some other news in brief now. The Israeli authorities have approved the construction of 566 homes for settlers in occupied East Jerusalem. Jerusalem's deputy mayor said the rules of the game had now changed since the inauguration of Donald Trump. The Israeli government lays claim to the whole of Jerusalem, while the Palestinians see the occupied East as the capital of a future state. In France, people are voting in the first round of the Socialist Party's primary to decide its candidate for the presidential election in April. The leading candidate is the former Prime Minister Manuel Valls, as the unpopular President François Hollande is standing down. Opinion polls suggest that whoever wins will have little chance of reaching the final round of the presidential election in May. A train crash in eastern India has killed at least 36 people and injured more than 60 others. 9 coaches and the engine of a train between Jagdalpur and Bhubaneswar were derailed near Kunarur in the state of Andhra Pradesh. Rail officials say the track was broken in 2 places and there is some suspicion there was sabotage. Sanjoy Majumdar reports.
9 coaches of the Hirakhand Express were thrown off the tracks after it had just left a station in Andhra Pradesh state while on its way from central India to Orissa in the east. The tragedy took place late at night. Most of the passengers would have been asleep and caught completely unaware. The impact was so severe that many had no chance. Rescue teams were sent immediately to the site of the crash. They worked through the night and much of the morning to pull survivors out of the mangled wreckage. They have been taken to a local district hospital where they're being treated for their injuries. It is still not clear what caused the crash. An investigation has been ordered to determine if human error led to it, or even an act of sabotage.
We can see that the track is broken at 2 places. The 2 tongue rails next to the main stock rail or the main rail on which the wheel is, those 2, we can see cuts on them. Now, this is being looked into by an expert team.
The area where the crash took place is a hotbed of Maoist insurgents. But India's railway system is notorious for being under-resourced and with aging infrastructure. This is the 3rd such accident since November, raising concerns over the safety standards in one of the world's largest and most heavily used networks. Sanjoy Majumdar, BBC News, Delhi.
After a week of political uncertainty, Gambians are venturing back onto the streets of the capital, Banjul, and preparing for the return of the man they elected president, Adama Barrow. His predecessor, Yahya Jammeh, left the country in the early hours of Sunday for Equatorial Guinea. Our West Africa correspondent Thomas Fessy has more.
Well, there's a great sense of relief here in Banjul, the capital of the Gambia, following the departure of the former leader, Mr. Jammeh. Life is finally picking up after 3 days of a total shutdown when people stayed home in fear of violence as West African states were mounting up pressure against the former strongman in order to have him step down. There was a declaration issued by the United Nations, the African Union and the regional bloc ECOWAS saying that they would work together to ensure that there is no witch hunting of former members of the regime and its supporters, and that they would prevent the seizure of assets and properties lawfully belonging to the former president. They also said that he was leaving the Gambia temporarily and that he had the liberty to return as a citizen of the Gambia and a former heads of state at the time of his choosing. Now, people here are waiting for the new president, Adama Barrow, to return to the country. I think there will be celebrations then, but he said that he would return when the path is clear. And so I think that they are conducting sort of security sweeps throughout the country to make sure that the conditions are met for his own safety.
Thomas Fessy there. Over 700 babies have been baptised at a mass ceremony in Georgia. These ceremonies take place several times a year. They're intended to promote population growth. The country's population is just 3.7 million people and has tumbled since the breakup of the Soviet Union. Ren Dimitri sent this report from Tbilisi.
A lot of crying babies and a lot of happy parents. This is where mass baptism ceremony is taking place. This is the Holy Trinity Church in Tbilisi, and there are several buckets with holy water, and parents are coming one by one, bringing their absolutely unsuspecting children and then handing them to the priests that are dipping babies into the water 3 times. Over 700 children have been registered for this mass baptism ceremony, and it's the 47th one. It was introduced by the head of the Georgian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Ilya II, back in 2008. He came up with this initiative to boost the population growth in Georgia, which is facing a demographic crisis.
Great event because this is my friend's baby, so I'm very happy to be here today and very thankful that this is a 3rd child, and it is important for our country also because for growth of our population.
Since 2008, over 30,000 children have been baptized in similar mass baptism ceremonies. What the Patriarch of Georgia suggested was that he will personally become the godparent for every 3rd child born into an Orthodox Christian family. This way he was asking people to have more babies and children, and it really worked. People are having more children.
The babies look all right, don't they? Ren Dimitri with that report from Tbilisi. Now, 2 people were gored to death Sunday in a bull wrestling festival in southern India, a day after a ban on this controversial sport was overturned. Several towns and villages in the southern state of Tamil Nadu celebrated the popular festival on Sunday after week-long protests that prompted authorities to bring an executive order lifting a Supreme Court ban on it. Now, there were massive demonstrations by crowds who said the spectacle must be legalised permanently and not just provisionally. It sounds like a plot to a classic American road trip movie. 5 young adventurers make a perilous coast-to-coast journey to build a new life in the West. Well, it's actually happened in real life to a group of baby raccoons. They were born in a truck in Florida, which was then driven to California. The driver only discovering his stowaways 4 days later. The raccoons are now being cared for at a local zoo until a new, more permanent home can be found for them. But all are doing well and settling in. Sport Today is coming up next. Don't go away.